So hi everyone, we have a conversation with authors and today we have Sam Hawke. And as always, this video is sponsored by The Broken Binding, which is a fantastic indie bookstore. And for this month, City of Lies is the book of the month. So you should really look into that because it's discounted right now and it's signed. So yeah, please welcome. Hi, Sam.
Hi, thanks for having me, Petrik. And thanks very much to The Broken Binding for having City of Lies. It's June Book of the Month. It's very exciting.
Yeah,
I
it's
also recommend that you should definitely check it out. Not that
uh,
I'm biased or anything.
by the way, for just to get things started, for newcomers to this video, please tell us a bit about yourself and your books.
Well, I'm Sam Hawke. I'm an Australian fantasy writer. I live in Canberra, in Australia, with my husband and my little miniature ninjas and my dog. My duology, The Poison Wars, the first book came out in 2018 with City of Lies, and the second book came out last year during COVID, the best possible time to release a book. So they're epic fantasy novels that sort of draw heavily on my my other great love besides fantasy, which is mystery and suspense novels. So the first novel is set in a besieged city where the main characters are trying to figure out who poisoned the chancellor and their uncle, and is trying to take the city down at the same time as trying to stop the city falling to the rebels. And it's essentially a closed room mystery set in a fantasy setting. The second book is the sequel, and it follows the same characters, and is probably more of a political intrigue in terms of mystery format. But yeah, if you like characters who are sort of trying to do their best in a very difficult situation, and sibling relationships and mystery and suspense and intrigue, then they might be for you.
Yeah, it is a really great series, though. I really loved it. And speaking of siblings, one of the things that I really love about this series is the relationship between the two main characters, Jovan and Kalina.
Yeah.
They're siblings, right?
Yeah.
And how did you manage to make their relationship felt so genuine? Is it inspired by real people?
Oh, thank you. I am one of five children, so I have very close relationship with my four siblings.
Oh,
And I'm sure that was an influencing factor, both in choosing to write about siblings and also in hopefully capturing the sibling relationship well. I mean, one thing that I really feel is kind of missing in a lot of adult novels are sibling relationships, because in children's novels, it's really common to see sibling relationships featured as main parts of the story. Like, you often, children's adventure stories are almost always family groups going on adventures, be they siblings or cousins. And so it's something that we sort of expect to see in children's novels. And then you kind of get to the adult zone, and novels tend to focus more on, and I don't know if this is more of a Western storytelling thing because of the kind of lone wolf hero thing, but sibling relationships seem to fall away a lot in favor of sort of antagonistic relationships and romantic relationships, and friends, rather than seeing those sibling bonds. So I think I always really relate to and enjoy it in fantasy when they have sibling characters, especially when they're sibling characters who are not antagonists, and also not, incesty. Thanks, Game of Thrones. It's really good to see it, and I guess I wanted to see that kind of relationship taking center stage in a story. And yeah, no doubt that's partly influenced by the fact that I have good relationships with all my siblings, and so I kind of know how interesting and complex it can be, because siblings
yeah,
are people who often literally know you from when you're born.
yeah,
And so you can go, if you stay in close contact with your siblings, you can know them longer than almost anybody else in your life.
yeah.
So you get all kinds of layers and interesting tensions, and the balance of caring, and the antagonism of being right on top of each other all the time, and growing up as children, and particularly sort of going through adolescence, and all that tumultuous time when kids' brains are developing and so on, and these are the people who are rubbing up against them all the time. So yeah, I love seeing it, and I wanted to center a story on that relationship.
Yeah, I totally understand what you mean. That's one of the things like that I really love about your books. And the other one is how unique the main character. For example, is Jovan. Jovan is a prover for poison, right? A lot of us read a lot of adult fantasy now, and most of them centered around an assassin. There is a
Yeah.
lot. There is a lot of fantasy that's centered around assassin and killers. But I don't think I've read anything. I don't think I've read anything else with a prover for poison as the main character. Was this always intentional, or was it your decision to first, let's say, you want him to be an assassin, but then you decide to change him into a prover?
No. I never intended Joe as an assassin.
Ah,
Look, I love assassin badass characters as much as anybody. But the very earliest conception I had of the idea that became City of Lies was about the proofing role, the
yeah.
kind of job. And I mean, I think it was a product of a lot of things sort of swirling around in my head over time. But I kind of, and I don't know whether you did this in school, but in school here, it's quite common in high school to do a test where you taste chemicals that only certain people can taste. And so you go around in your science class and you taste the chemical that's in coffee, for example, or coriander that some people respond really strongly to and some people don't react to at all. And that sort of led into an interest in this kind of concept of people who are super tasters and people who are like really low level tasters. So some people have you know, a lot greater capacity to detect a larger range of flavors and things. And I think at some point I was sort of wondering, you know, if that was a genetic predisposition towards super tasting, then what could you use that for besides, you know, being really good at writing wine tasting notes? And kind of the obvious sort of thing that you could do with a super ability to taste would be, you know, related to distinguishing the ingredients of food. And yeah, I just kind of had this idea of you know, what if my main character did that for a job? What if his whole family was kind of genetically predisposed to being super tasters, which made them kind of uniquely qualified to do this job really well? And if you're going to do it as a family tradition, then I thought, you know, it can't be a kind of, you can't be a disposable servant who's being used to taste someone's food expecting to, you know, die quite often. It would have to be like a proper skilled profession that you wanted your children to go into, which would mean it'd have to be a position that had some kind of, you know, status and honor. And so I kind of, yeah, had this idea of, you know, what sort of society would you need a role like that, where that role could be reasonably expected to be, you know, secret but important and valued. So yeah, I kind of built the whole story around this idea of wanting to write about sibling poison tasters, and the kind of the idea of the mystery, you know, sort of falls out of that naturally because they're in a position where their job is to try to stop someone being poisoned. Well, what's the worst thing that can happen to them is, you know, a poison getting past their net, basically. So, you know, the conceit of the novel at the start is that their uncle who taught them succumbs to a poison, and so does the chancellor he was meant to protect, a poison that's not in their records and not in their notes, and they don't know how to detect and protect against. So yeah, the story kind of grew from there, but that was always the main concept.
That's incredible. And you also spoke, right? And I've read the books, and of course I agree, is that a mystery is a huge part of your books. It is a huge part of your books. And I was wondering, because RJ Barker just released his alter ego, right? RJ Darker.
I know.
Yeah.
No relationship between those two.
Yeah, no relationship at all.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to start RJ's new book. Yep.
Yeah, and do you have plan, let's say, to write, let's say, a mystery book? I think you will do well.
That's very kind of you. Fantasy is my real love, and I tell this because I think that everything I write ends up being fantasy.
Ah,
And I think that's just how I'm wired.
mm,
And the good thing about writing fantasy is that you can write a mystery novel, and you can write a crime novel, you can write a gangster fiction novel, you can write a romance, you can write an adventure. These things are are the sort of the true genres of the book, and the setting is fantasy. But I think fantasy gives you the kind of flexibility to write any kind of story you want. Also, I'm really lazy and I hate research. So writing a real world, a novel set like in a real time and place would require me to like get everything right. And yeah, like if you write a modern kind of novel, a mystery or a crime, you might be expected to know how like guns work, and I don't. So if I set it in a castle instead, I'm much more confident with swords. But I am very because I love mysteries. I'm very excited that RJ's writing mysteries, and Jen Williams is just releasing a crime novel as well, which it's fantastic for me because authors that I love, crossing into genres that I love. So yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah. So was becoming a fantasy author something that you've dreamt since you were a kid?
Yeah, as soon as I knew being an author was a job that you could have, that was the one I wanted. So my earliest memory of being aware that you could write your own books, they weren't just things that appeared magically on the shelves, was pretty young. I was obsessed in my year 1 class with making my own novels, by which I mean I would get 50 sheets of paper, staple them together, draw an elaborate cover, and then go through and write chapter names and maybe like 1 or 2 sentences for each chapter, and go through and do the whole book like that, and then lose interest in that book and start something else by the time I'd finished. I never finished one of these novels, but I already knew the shape of the thing that I wanted to do, even if I was too lazy to follow through on the whole plan. So I wanted to be a novelist back then, and I in fact had my very long-suffering, lovely year 1 teacher. I told her in a kind of obnoxious 6-year-old way that I would become a writer one day, and that I would make sure I recognized her in the acknowledgements in my first book, which I did. You will see her in the acknowledgements of City of Lies. Yeah, so no, I always wanted to do that. I don't know if I don't know if I would have identified a genre at an early stage, but probably the first books that I was really super into at that early age were Enid Blyton adventure novels. So the first book that I remember trying to write as a book, I was in about year 3, I think, was like a kind of famous 5e adventure story set on an island. But even then, I remember I couldn't help myself. Something supernatural happened on the island, or there was some sort of like long lost secret society on the island or something. So I was already kind of delving into fantasy even then, when I wouldn't necessarily have called it fantasy. But yeah, I'd kind of figured out genres a bit later in primary school, and I'd already figured out that fantasy was the thing that I was really into by then. And I read a number of grossly inappropriate books for my age. I read the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, The Unbeliever, when I was way too young to really be reading those books. But we didn't like now. There's so much great like YA fantasy and middle grade fantasy out there marketed to kids at that age group. But like when I was a kid, I just read whatever was on my brother's bookshelf or in my grandma's house. Or I mean, I grew up in a house that just had bookshelves like this everywhere. So, and we just used to go to the library every fortnight as well. So I was constantly surrounded by books, and I would just read anything that I got my hands on. And it happened that I was fortunate enough to discover, the Lord of the Rings and books like that in primary school, to kind of give me a sense of, oh boy, yeah, if the book's got dragons in it, I'm probably going to like it.
Who would you say?
And I think oh, sorry.
Who would you say as, let's say, the biggest inspirations for your work?
Biggest inspiration. I probably have a lot of different inspirations that are kind of mushed together. In terms of like aspirationally, my favorite author is Robin Hobb, and I discovered her books first when I was probably 13 or 14, I guess, when I first read Assassins. And I think I read that trilogy, and probably knew then that that's the ultimate of what I would want to do. Like, I mean, I sort of think I thought at the time, well, what's the point? Because I'll never write a book as good as this. But I knew that that's kind of what I want, like that they kind of had everything that I wanted to do in writing, in the sense of just characters that really felt genuinely like real people that I knew, and that kind of very thoughtful, intelligent fantasy that has all of the things that you love. It still has dragons and adventure and lost princes and so on, but in a way that just felt so relatable and so human, and just it just made me feel so many things, many of them very sad things, but still feeling them. And I just think she's just such an amazing writer. So in terms of sort of deliberate influences, she would be my favorite. I think I was probably very much influenced by a whole raft of fantasy authors that I read through my teens and 20s. And in those days, I would read everything that was released in Australia, which wasn't obviously the same selection that would have been internationally. And in particular, Australia is really, women writers were dominant in Australia in the kind of 90s and 2000s. When I was a teenager in the 90s, there was a whole blockbuster series of Australian women writers. So I know that kind of recently, when I sort of came online basically, and started talking to other readers and writers internationally, and kind of found this thing that people said, that women didn't write fantasy. That was such a strange revelation for Australians, because in Australia it's, what do you mean women are the main ones who write fantasy? So kind of career-wise, like I always had these women to look up to as this is an achievable career. And people like some of the big blockbuster overseas authors who made it to our shelves, Kate Elliott, who's had such an incredible long career of really different novels. Catherine Kerr was a big influence on me, with her just amazing Devery series that just spanned such generations of storytelling. And then on a completely different note, I was probably really when writing City, I was really kind of channeling my love of like old 50s spy suspense novels as well. So my grandma had the entire collection of Alistair MacLean spy novels on her shelves when I was growing up, and my sisters and I loved those books, and we read them just over and over. And they are, in fact, a real genuine masterclass in how to kind of ratchet up suspense in a short period of time. And they're really, they were the first books that I remember exploring unreliable narrators and all kinds of like really interesting things, but just that slow building tension, and especially in a closed room setting, was something that probably really influenced me when I was writing City of Lies, because I just love that diminishing, that sense when you have a certain cast of characters trapped in a situation, and you're just sort of slowly eliminating suspects, and you keep being surprised about the secrets that people are keeping. I think that was probably a big influence on me.
That's so cool. And for your characters, you use first POV for both, right?
Sorry?
For both of your characters, Jovan and Kalina, both of them use first-person POV narrative instead of instead of third person. That's quite rare also in fantasy.
It's becoming a lot more common now, I think. It definitely would have been unusual in the kind of sort of preceding few decades. Now I think it's probably just as popular. I think that it gives you that sense of immediacy, that sort of really deep connected relationship with the character. I used to actually think that I would have said that I hated first person narration. I really didn't like it until I read Assassins, which was the first person fantasy novel that I remember reading. And I finished that and I was like, oh, like, wow, this is what you can do with first person. You can really, really know a character and know what they what they care about and what they feel. I actually I didn't want to write City in first person. I tried very hard to write it in third person, and it just didn't work.
Ah,
Yeah, so if anyone ever tells you it's a simple prospect to change from first to third, it's not at all. It's a very different style. And I started writing City when, I think it must have been about 2003 or 2004 or so.
wow, that's a long
Because
time.
I was out of uni. I'd finished uni, but I not long. So my husband and I were living in the first house we ever lived in when I started it, and I plotted out the whole book. I had these great characters that I really liked. I liked the concept. I had
Mm.
basically the entire novel bar the ending kind of plotted out scene by scene, and I wrote maybe 20,000 words of it, and I just
Wow.
couldn't make it work. And at some point I sort of gave up on this idea of it being third person, but well, what if I just write in first? And
Ah,
it just fit. Joe fit us first in the first draft of the book, and the book as I submitted it to my agent. I'd originally written it as Jove in first person and then Kalina in third person,
okay.
because I thought it might be too confusing to have them as both in first. But in the publishing process, that got changed to them both being in first person, which ultimately I'm glad for, even though I know that it does present a bit of a challenge
Interesting.
for readers, just because their brother and sister, they are often in the same location, like they're trapped in the same city, so they're not
Yeah.
very far apart geographically. They were raised by the same person, they have the same kind of moral core. So there's a hurdle in saying, okay, do they sound distinct enough?
Mhm.
But ultimately, you know them. I think you know them better. And if I'd stuck with third person for Kalina, I think it would have been keeping her at arm's length in a way that I'm ultimately glad that I didn't do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it really worked though, because in the second book, their characters became so distinctive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had a bit more flexibility in the second book to separate them a little bit. So
Mm.
they were sort of able to kind of do that. But yeah, it's hard for me because I know some readers find them a bit too similar, and that's a totally valid view. But for me, it's very
Different.
I write them so differently. Like they feel very different to me, and
Yeah,
I
understand.
know because I had to restructure City really dramatically back from the version that my agent saw, and originally I had just had it kind of free flowing between the two characters without fixed, one chapter in one voice, one chapter in the other voice. I didn't have it in set chapters like that, and
Uh,
my agent convinced me correctly to make it more structured. But that meant that I had to change a lot of, because the timeline of a mystery means that you can't mess around with the order too much.
yeah.
I had to change a lot of things that were originally in one point of view into the other point of view. And that was not just a question of just making a few changes. Like I had to really seriously rewrite them so that they sounded right, because to me, Jove and Kalina think, even though they've got a lot in common, they think about things and they observe things very differently.
Uh,
So all of those scenes, it was not at all straightforward to just quickly change a few pronouns. Instead, it was like it was quite a process. So yeah, I guess they feel very different to me, but yeah.
so that means that it took about 14 years for City of Lies to be published since you first wrote it, right?
Oh
14.
well, I wrote the start of it, and then
Yeah.
at some point, not that far in, I abandoned it for reasons that are unclear to me. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure they made sense at the time, but I didn't pick it up again until after I was at home looking after my first child, like 10 years later almost,
Yeah.
probably 8 or 10 years later. And yeah, I remember a friend of mine who's also a writer had come up to see me and the baby from a different, she's from Melbourne, and she came up for the day. And we got to talking about writing, and she was sort of quizzing me on why I wasn't doing anything.
Uh,
Um, I remember sort of that being a kind of a switch that I thought, well, you know, I'm here, I'm home with the baby, so I'm not doing my day job at the moment. My child never sleeps, so I'm awake like 2 hours a day. You know, I might as well give this a shot now. If I'm not going to do it now, when am I ever going to do it? So I decided that's it. I want to write a book. And I went back and just looked over old projects, and one of them was the project that was City. And I, you know, picked it up. I picked it up and I read what I'd written, which was, you know, 20 or 30,000 words or something, and thought, this is quite good. Like, why did I stop? So, and then, you know, I had the start of a book, and I had the whole, you know, scene by scene outline. And I just, like, I genuinely don't remember what it was that made me stop in the first place.
Okay.
I must have gotten stalled for some reason. But I just picked it up and finished it. So I think it probably took me about a year or so to write the draft. And then I you know, faffed around editing it for, you know, at least a year. And I'm not, you know, I'm a big procrastinator, so actually taking the step of showing anyone something I'd written was a big deal for me. And so, yeah, I wasted a very long time, you know, really planning how to query agents and so on, and very thoroughly over prepared for all of this stuff, just to, you know, delay actually showing my work. But yeah, so I think it was probably about 2 years of writing around and mucking around with it myself before I kind of gave it to my agent, and then we did more edits, and I did that big restructure of the book, and then we sent it out to publishing. So, you know, publishing is not the swiftest industry, as you know. Even after we'd sold it, I think it still took. We sold it in August 2016, and it didn't come out until July 2018.
Wow, 2 years.
Just because of publishing. Publishing is just slow. There wasn't any major rewrite or anything in there. It was just they just decided that they'd do it, you know, at a particular point, and I think they shifted around release dates to, you know, choose a favorable release date or whatever. So yeah, it was a long time, and then of course you get your second book and you suddenly have to write that in a much shorter period of time. Or in my case, write it twice. Yeah.
You have to rewrite your second book, right?
I did have to rewrite my second book, yeah.
Oh
so I wrote a draft that my publisher wasn't gelling with, and I had to sort of start from scratch and do it again, which is not an experience I, you know, recommend.
Yeah, definitely.
It wasn't the most fun thing I've ever done. Writing a book's quite slow, so, you know, yeah, doing it just once is better.
Yeah, and so right now you've been published for 3 years, right? 3 years since 2008.
Yeah.
And what's your most memorable moments? A happy one.
Oh, happy memorable moment. Well, Robin Hobb blurbed my book. So that was probably
that's pretty
like
amazing.
the coolest thing that could ever have happened. Like 15-year-old me could know that there was going to be a book that had Robin Hobb's name on it that I wrote in an actual bookstore. I will probably never get over how much I love that. So that was pretty amazing. I mean, there've been heaps of really, really cool things that have happened. You know, it's hard work, and, you know, you get setbacks and so on, but ultimately, like, we do it because we love it. We have to do it because we love it. You'd go mad otherwise. And just, yeah, now probably the biggest buzz I get is how many friends' books I can find on the shelves when I go to a bookstore. It feels like, you know, visiting friends. I'll sit there with my kids being like, oh, this person, and there's another friend, and there's another friend. And it's really entertaining. I really love it. So, you know, I'm constantly delighted by being able to be friends with people who, you know, are just amazing writers and who I'm such a fan of. Getting to actually, you know, hang out with them and chat to them as colleagues and friends is really cool. Yeah. And I would have said, oh, hey, when I was up for the Hugo at last year's Worldcon, that would have been like an amazing thing. But of course, you know, COVID ruined that. So that one line.
Oh my God. And there will be another debut being released soon, right? By an Australian author, Shelley Parker Chan, She Who Became the
Oh
Sun.
yeah.
Oh, amazing
She
book.
Became the Sun.
Amazing book.
It is an amazing book. I started reading that book. Shelley's a friend, and I had an advanced copy. Oh, probably a fair while ago. I can't remember when I got it, but like sort of maybe earlier than this last year, I think. But
Oh,
anyway, I started reading it in a bath,
okay.
just thinking I'll just start this. I'm going to get out of the bath soon. It's getting a bit cold. I'll just start this, but I won't read for very long. And I stayed in that bath until that water was so cold because I did not want to stop reading the book. It was just incredible. It's just really, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a smash hit.
Yeah,
You know, I think
so.
everyone can see, you can't read it and not know it's going to be a smash hit. Like it's just got all of the, I just think it's going to appeal to so many people because it has that kind of classic, you know, peasant rising to emperor kind of fantasy storyline, and it's got like cool battle strategies and all that sort of stuff to kind of appeal to the classic side, but it's also like got the sea drama side of it, and lots of emotions and pining and so on. So I think it's really going to appeal to people who like the kind of more emotional fantasy as well. And it's just I mean, it's a brutal read, as you know. And I think before I read it, I was thinking I was a bit sort of semi over anti-heroes as a thing, and in general, like I you know, obviously you go through phases in what you're reading, and I have definitely been tending toward more optimistic fantasy over the last 5 or so years, you know, world affairs being what they are. You know, it's been nice to have some sort of sense of optimism in our written work, and so I've kind of been leaning toward things with lead characters who are, you know, decent people. And I wrote my books with that sort of view, with you know, trying to write decent humans trying to do the best they can in bad circumstances. But I read She Became the Sun. I was like, maybe I'm not quite done with anti-heroes, as it turns out.
Totally, I was wrong.
I'll make an exception. Anyway, everyone should go out. Everyone's already going to go out and buy it, but everyone should go out and buy that. Jasmine Throne also.
Oh yeah, I haven't read that one.
Suri. Oh, you will love it. It's great. That's another sort of amazing, really good, and just characters who are so interesting and layered and not in their traditional roles. And particularly just the women in different roles in Tasha's book are just so strong in different ways. And I really dig seeing this kind of different types of characters being explored in fantasy, which you know, we're really just in a golden age at the moment of what we get to read. There's so much great stuff out there.
So many books to read now. It's it's overwhelming.
Yeah, well, there is that the constant to be read pile that I will never conquer. Yeah. But it's a good problem to have, right? Like,
I definitely agree.
Buffet of riches that we have to get through.
And now that you know a lot of authors, I think one of the most hilarious and interesting thing about Hollow Empire is that, well, you include a lot of authors to become.
Yes, I do. So yeah, the epigraphs in City of Lies, as you know, are little poison notes, sort of describing a particular poison, which people really enjoyed in the first one. Like, a lot of readers really loved those notes. So when we did the second one, I knew that I wanted to do little epigraphs on the chapters again, but I didn't want to do more poisons because I already made up, like, whatever it is in the first book, 32 poisons or something. And that's, look, I gotta tell you, it's a lot of made up herbs and stuff to do. And I figured it would get a bit boring if you just, there's only so many different ways you can, you know, your body can respond to a poison. And I think I pretty thoroughly covered most of them in the first one. And so I did think briefly about doing antidotes as an option. I can't remember when I decided I get the idea of just telling a little story. Not to harp on about Robin Hobb again, but there's in the ship's books, she uses chapter epigraphs tell a little story within a story between people who are sending messages, the messenger bird operators in different cities. And the story is mostly relaying messages about what's happening in the cities, but slowly over the course of the books, the relationship between the people responsible for the birds on each side, they start adding their own little notes to each other, and it becomes a whole thing. Anyway, I really, really love that. And I thought, well, what if I could do something that tells sort of little tiny snippets of story in those bits, just so that they've got, there's something fun to do in them. I can't remember where I got the idea to well, probably because I hate making up names, right? I'm a terrible fantasy author. I don't like making up fictional names for stuff. So maybe I originally did it as a placeholder, as a joke, to use my friends' names, but it became a thing, and I ran it past the people in it, obviously, to say, hey, is it okay if I poison you? Which, as it turned out, most people were delighted to be poisoned. So yeah, I had so much fun with those because it was just an opportunity to kind of tell a silly little story, and some of them are completely random, and some of them are based on, like, this a little anecdote. The one that refers to Melissa Crusoe is from an anecdote that actually happened to her and her husband. So there's a couple of real ones in there. And yeah, I just had a lot of fun by the end, thinking of creative ways to have my friends murder people or be murdered or attempt it.
I think the one that really made me laugh so hard was Nicholas Eames. I think it was Death by Balding or something. Something really.
Oh, did he have the cosmetics that ate away at his face? Maybe.
Yeah. I laughed so hard.
The hair tonic. It was the hair tonic, wasn't it? Yeah. People did used to get poisoned by hair tonics a lot. There's this great book. Hang on, I should have it. I might have it somewhere. Hang on. This book called The Royal Art of Poisons, which is really cool. I wish I'd had it when I was writing City. I'm sorry, I'm scanning the bookshelf behind you if you're wondering where I'm looking. Oh, here it is. This.
Oh, wow.
The Royal Art of Poison, which I highly recommend just as a fun. It's a non-fiction book, but it's written in very engaging fashion, and it kind of goes through like the sort of fashions in various royal courts, and famous poisonings or purported poisonings and stuff. Basically, sort of how a lot of famous people got poisoned, or people thought they got poisoned. And there's a lot of really cool, fun historical anecdotes in there. And I got a lot of ideas for ways people could die to put in the little epigraphs from that book. So yeah, hair tonics were a big thing. Makeup, people wore a lot of poison makeup. And like things that people just seem to they genuinely seem to know already that it was going to poison them, but just kept doing it anyway. And clothes, like dyes that used in clothes and things. So yeah, there's lots of cool ways that people have died in poisoning, but yeah, it's fun to do it to your mates. Nick had it coming.
And that book, The Royal Art of Poison, is non-fiction.
Yeah, they're real. Yeah, it's just, but it's non-fiction, but it's not told in a dry way. It's really engagingly written. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You can just read it for funsies, just even if you're not researching poison or anything.
I think sometimes I'll do that just to read for fun. And
look, I have some niche interests. Okay.
So before we wrap this up, what are you working on right now?
I'm writing a book which doesn't have a title yet, which I am calling my Hades Town Les Mis book.
Okay.
Because it is it has a bit of a Hades Town sort of flavor, in that is kind of industrial revolution, pre-industrial revolution, workers' rebellion kind of flavor, but one of the main characters has to descend into hell to rescue his loved one. So it's kind of yeah, it's partly about a workers' rebellion and partly about a descent into hell, and there are some angry ghosts everywhere. And it's, yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. It's very different to the Poison Wars books. But yeah, I'm really enjoying writing some different kind of people and different sort of relationships, and yeah, hopefully that will be done and out there at some point, but I'm working entirely off contract at the moment, so who knows.
Okay. So Poison Wars for now is still a duology, right?
It is, yes. Although there's, I mean, as you would know, there's plenty of room for me to write more if that ends up being viable. Yeah, I was only contracted to write 2, so there's 2 for now. But you know, who knows? There's room for more, and we'll see. There's more of the story that I would like to tell if I had the opportunity, but I'm also happy with where I left it. I think readers can be satisfied with where it's been left without, you know, feeling like it's an unfinished story.
There is no brutal cliffhanger for sure.
No.
Yeah,
If that's the end, then that can be the end.
Yeah, I agree. But there's definitely room, though. There's definitely room for exploration.
Yeah, for sure. I have more terrible things I can do to them if necessary.
More authors to kill off.
More authors to kill off, always.
Well, I think that's it for today's interview. I just want to say thank you so much, Sam, for coming to this channel. You are the first author to visit this channel twice. Yeah,
I know. I'm very excited to see that.
Yeah,
it's an honor. It's always great to talk to you, Petrik. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and to those of you who are watching this interview, please check out The Broken Binding and get a copy of City of Lies if you haven't read this book or if you haven't owned it. It's really a great series, and I highly recommend it, especially the second book. This is one of my favorite book of last year. So yeah, please give this a read. Please give this a purchase, also, and maybe
thank you.
Maybe we can get a continuation to the third book because I want it.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Petrik.
So much, Sam. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.